Kickstarter games. Games that I feel get a bad rap to this day thanks to a special bad few. But in reality, there was a lot of amazing games to come out of it. And from my experience, from actually backing games, it's been really good. The only problems I've constantly ran into with mostly every game is delays. Lots and lots of delays. But I don't mind. Games take time and most of these people are first-time developers. Out of the 8 games I've backed, 4 have been delivered in one way or another. Yeah, Wonderful 101 Remastered was, well, a remaster for a new console generation, and to also get it on different platforms other than Nintendo. Micromages was porting an already completed game onto a playable NES cartridge. Framemakers is still in early access, but anyone could buy and play it on Steam. And that leaves one game that's not a port nor a remaster that's fully completed and released through Kickstarter. That being Deathbulge, Battle of the Bands. I mentioned it in my Lisa video as one of my most hyped games last year that came out of nowhere, because it did come out of nowhere, thanks to the non-stop delays thanks to the year of 2020. But it's finally out. Was it worth the wait and all the delays? Definitely. Now, let's not add any more delays and start talking about this game, because it's had enough delays already. Deathbulge, Battle of the Bands is an RPG where you fight with the power of music. The game definitely checks all the boxes on my RPG checklist, aka a good style, interesting gameplay, and an interesting or funny story. Usually if a game checks off even one of those things on my list, I'm hooked, and this game checks them all. Let's start by talking about the story. The story is about a local band called Deathbulge that consists of guitarist Faye, bassist Ian the Skeleton, and drummer Briff, as they sign up to the Battle of the Bands. But the one problem with this Battle of the Bands is that it's a Battle of the Bands to the death. Now, in the Battle of the Bands, Deathbulge can use their music to fight enemies or protect themselves. The story takes you to a lot of interesting and funny places as you try and find a way out of the contract. Places like a forest where everything is muscles, from the trees to the snakes. In the hair of a living tree that's now home to a bunch of birds. An underground recording studio that's used by a bunch of orchestral fish. Crowd surfing a metal concert. And my favorite, traveling on a 30-decker bus as you ghost hunt for a free ride. I do have a couple small problems with the story, mainly involving the ending areas. Not with the story itself. The story itself is good, but I feel like the difficulty spike towards the end of the game hits you hard. But I'll talk about that later. And the boss before the actual Battle of the Band starts was much harder than the final boss itself. Now, on to the gameplay, because it's really interesting, but it's hard to explain. It's a turn-based RPG. But instead of the usual player takes a turn, then the enemy does, you get a bar that shows when it's your turn. Almost like a loading bar. Once it reaches the end, it's your turn. But each character class and enemy has different speeds to reach the end. So you could take 3 turns or more before the enemy could even take their first turn, depending on your speed. There is also 4 effect spaces on the bar that could either be used to help you or affect you. Stuff like healing, speeding up the progress bar, allies to help you in battle, damage spaces, slowing down the progress bar, a bomb that counts down every time you hover over it, and one that I absolutely hate that can only be dealt to you, the hype drain. Hype being this game's SP, it's definitely my least favorite effect, because there's no way to combat it until after you finish the area where you get introduced to it, and where it's used the most. There is also some buffs to make your effects more effective, and a shield to protect your good effects from being replaced. As for the way of attacking, you get 1 main attack that doesn't use any hype, and 3 special attacks that do use hype called mods. You only get those 4 attacks all game, but those attacks are customizable. Even your main non-hype attack. Now, all the hype attacks have a specific class type. Stuff like Show Off, Well-Toned, Tuner, Distorter, Goth, and Sampler. It doesn't mean much at first, but whatever mod you have equipped in the first mod spot will actually determine what class you are. Each class has different stats, of course, but most of the classes do play the same, except for the Sampler class, which is really cool and switches things up. Instead of getting 3 hype mods and 1 non-hype mod, Sampler gives you 3 non-hype mods and lets you attack 2 times in 1 turn.
It really helps you get different effects out on one turn. Lastly is, your band is 3 people that you could switch to at any time, whether it be waiting for your turn or attacking. There's no cooldown or anything either. It's an interesting small thing that works really well. What I usually do is to make Faye's speed fast, but that class makes her health low. So whenever it's the enemy's turn to attack, I'll switch characters so that way they take the damage and Faye doesn't take any. It's a fun gameplay loop. Now, let's talk about the art style. Since it's made by Deathbulge, it has his style, and I love it. If you're not familiar with his style, he seems to have a bit of a basic webcomic look, but he knocks it out of the park with his character designs. Most characters have crazy hair that perfectly fits their character, leading to some really fun designs. Like how the default Faye, the guitarist, has her hair in the shape of a guitar. Also on the topic of webcomics, there's a ton of references to his comics. You'll see a lot of his characters showing up and some of his more recognizable poses and scenarios. There's a reason why you kick down every door in this game. I guess I'll wrap it up with some of my complaints. They're not game ruining, but they are still important to the gameplay. I've already said the one about the hype drain. It's annoying, but thankfully it's not used till mostly the end of the game. Also, the levels are set up like mazes and can get very confusing. I think the concert is the worst to navigate, especially since it introduces the hype drain enemies. And I'm not a fan of the actual Battle of the Band fights, which actually comes pretty close to the end too. All the other fights before this, you take on all the enemies and they all have separate health bars and you're able to switch who you damage. Using an AoE attack does about the same amount of damage to every enemy too. But for the Battle of the Band stuff, it switches things up. Now the enemies are set up just like your team, so there's up to 4 enemies, but you can only attack 1 and only 1 can be damaged at a time. Then after a couple turns, they'll switch the characters. You can use an AoE attack, but the other characters whose turn it isn't take so little damage. There's only about 5 of those fights anyways. And the first actual band fight that wasn't a tutorial was probably the hardest fight in the story. Once I found the best mods though, it was easy. In the end, I found a pretty overpowered setup, mostly involving the slap of protection. Well, I should wrap up this review. In conclusion, if you like RPGs with interesting mechanics, I'd say check it out. It's got a decently long story with a good amount of side quests too. Well, until next time, I'm out.